A crushed car lay hidden at the bottom of a deep ravine in the forests of Washington state, its twisted metal resting among damp leaves and towering trees. There was no body inside the wreckage. There were no pools of blood, no clear signs of a fatal struggle, no final trace of the person who had been driving. All that remained was a name written across police reports and unanswered questions: Leah Roberts. What seemed at first like a tragic accident soon began to unravel into something far more disturbing. The crash was supposed to be the end of the story, but instead it marked the beginning of one of America's most haunting cold cases. Leah vanished without a trace after her car plunged from the highway. Did she die in the wilderness that night, lost to the forest forever, or did someone remove her from the scene before help could arrive? Tonight, we dive into a mystery where silence speaks louder than evidence. Leah Roberts lived in a place that seemed untouched by chaos, where daily life moved slowly and predictably. The small town where she spent her early adulthood was filled with modest homes, quiet streets, and neighbors who recognized one another by name. Mornings arrived with the sound of passing cars and distant birds, and evenings settled into calm routines. Nothing about the environment suggested danger. It was the kind of setting where people believed bad things happened far away. Far across the country, the forests of Washington state carried a similar illusion of peace. Endless stretches of road curved through towering evergreen trees, creating a sense of isolation wrapped in natural beauty. The air felt clean, the silence heavy but comforting. These roads appeared harmless, inviting travelers to reflect, to breathe, and to escape the noise of everyday life. Yet beneath that peaceful surface, these remote areas could quickly become places where people vanished without witnesses. This contrast between calm and danger would become central to Leah's story. Everything about her safety, stability, and order. Yet tragedy was already quietly shaping her life. The world around her looked peaceful, but inside Leah, emotional storms were forming. Invisible to most who saw her smiling face and gentle demeanor, Leah Roberts was only 23 years old, a college student with a soft voice and thoughtful eyes. She was known for her kindness, for listening carefully when others spoke, and for rarely drawing attention to herself. Friends described her as introspective and sensitive, someone who felt deeply and often kept her emotions private. She enjoyed simple things, spending time with people she cared about, and imagining what her future might look like. On the surface, Leah seemed like any other young woman building her life. She attended classes, worked toward her degree, and maintained friendships. Yet behind that normal routine existed a deep emotional wound that shaped nearly every thought she had about the future. Several years earlier, Leah had lost both her parents in a tragic plane crash. A sudden disaster that shattered her sense of security. The death of her parents changed everything. In one moment, the people who grounded her, supported her, and defined her sense of family were gone. Grief entered her life without warning and never truly left. Those close to her noticed how she became quieter after the tragedy. She carried sadness with her, even during happy moments, as though a shadow followed her everywhere. After losing her parents, Leah went to live with an adoptive family who welcomed her into their home and did their best to provide stability. They cared deeply for her and tried to help her heal. But emotional trauma does not disappear simply because circumstances improve. Leah appreciated their support, yet she often felt disconnected, as if part of her remained stuck in the moment. She lost everything. Her friends saw similar changes. While Leah still smiled and laughed, there was a distance in her eyes. Conversations sometimes drifted toward feelings of being lost or unsure about her purpose. She spoke about wanting a fresh start, about escaping the memories that haunted her. To some, it sounded like a young person searching for independence. To others, it sounded like someone running from pain. One detail that stood out to many was Leah's repeated mention of disappearing. She did not mean it in a dark or threatening way. Instead, she described it almost dreamily, as if imagining a life somewhere else, where no one knew her past. She talked about starting over, about becoming someone new, free from grief and emotional weight. These comments were often brushed aside as stress or youthful frustration. Yet in hindsight, they feel more significant. Leah was not simply unhappy with her situation. She was searching for escape. The loss of her parents had created a deep internal conflict between wanting connection and wanting freedom from emotional suffering. Some relationships in Leah's life became strained after the tragedy. Grief affected how she interacted with others sometimes making her withdraw or feel misunderstood. Though no one described major conflicts, there were moments of tension, particularly when people tried to encourage her to move on or stay focused on her studies. Leah seemed torn between responsibility and the desire to leave everything behind, despite her inner struggles. There was no clear sign that Leah faced immediate danger. There were no threats, no history of violence, and no known enemies in her life. Everything around her appeared calm and ordinary, which later made her disappearance even more disturbing. The peaceful town, familiar faces, and stable routines created a strong illusion of safety. From the outside, it seemed like a life, slowly recovering from tragedy. Yet beneath that calm surface, Leah carried unresolved grief. Losing both parents so young often leaves lasting emotional wounds, creating confusion, loneliness, and a powerful urge to escape in search of healing and meaning. Leah's longing for a new beginning was not unusual for someone dealing with trauma. What made it more concerning was how strongly she focused on leaving rather than building within her current life. Her words about disappearing suggested more than just travel. They reflected a deeper emotional need to separate from her past entirely. As time passed, Leah appeared to live normally while quietly preparing for an undefined escape. No one around her realized that the peaceful town, her supportive, adoptive family, and her familial routine would soon be left behind. The calm of her life created a false sense of safety, hiding the emotional pain that continued to grow inside her. That quiet struggle slowly pushed Leah toward a life-changing decision. Soon, she would drive away toward an unknown future, and somewhere within Washington's silent forests, that future would mysteriously disappear. In early March of the year 2000, Leah Roberts made a decision that would quietly shift her life onto a path no one could predict. Without telling many people exactly where she was going, she packed her belongings into a car and left North Carolina, alone. There was no farewell gathering, no detailed explanation, only a sense that she needed to go. Those who knew her later recalled that Leah seemed calm, determined, and emotionally distant in the days before her departure. Before leaving, Leah wrote letters to her adoptive family. In them, she spoke about wanting to discover who she truly was and to explore life beyond the place that held so many painful memories. Her words were gentle, loving, and reflective, but also carried a subtle sense of finality. She thanked them for their care and expressed gratitude for everything they had done. While nothing in the letters directly suggested danger, many later felt they resembled goodbye messages more than simple travel notes. What made her journey even more mysterious was the absence of a clear destination. Leah did not mention where she planned to go or how long she intended to be away. She simply drove west, moving across state lines with no confirmed stops. Credit card records showed minimal activity, and no hotel reservations were ever found. It was as though Leah wanted to disappear quietly, without leaving behind a trail that could easily be followed as she traveled. The vast landscapes changed from familiar towns to open highways and distant horizons. Long hours alone in the car gave her time to think, to reflect, and perhaps to confront the emotions she had been carrying for years. For someone seeking escape or transformation, the road often becomes both a physical and psychological journey, separating the past from the unknown future. Days later, in March of 2000, that journey came to a sudden and violent halt in Washington state, on a remote stretch of highway surrounded by dense forest. Leah's car veered off the road. The vehicle plunged down a steep ravine, tumbling through trees and rocks before coming to rest at the bottom. The impact was severe, leaving the car badly damaged and twisted beyond recognition in some areas. For anyone who later saw the wreckage, survival seemed almost impossible. The crash site was isolated, hidden far below the highway among dense trees and rough terrain. From above, the wrecked car was almost impossible to see, swallowed by forest shadows. When authorities finally reached the vehicle, they expected to find a body. Instead, they discovered Leah's personal belongings still inside. Her purse, clothing, and everyday items remained scattered through the damaged interior, suggesting a sudden accident rather than a planned departure. Yet one crucial element was missing. Leah herself had vanished without a trace. There were no large bloodstains that would indicate a fatal injury inside the car. There were no clear drag marks leading away from the wreckage. The surrounding ground showed no obvious signs of someone crawling or stumbling through the forest while injured. Despite the severity of the crash, the physical evidence did not align with what investigators would normally expect to see in such a situation. Search teams combed the area extensively. They moved through dense brush, down steep slopes, and across uneven ground, looking for any trace of Leah. They searched for clothing, footprints, blood, or remains, but the forest offered nothing. This absence of evidence became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. In most serious crashes, there are clear signs of what happened to the driver. Even in wilderness settings, something is usually found. In Leah's case, it was as though she had simply vanished. Then came the detail that shifted the entire investigation. One of the car doors appeared to have been opened after the crash. The damage patterns suggested the door had not burst open during impact, but rather had been manually opened afterward. This raised a chilling possibility. If Leah had survived the crash, she may have managed to open the door herself and exit the vehicle. But given the severity of the wreck, many experts questioned whether she would have been physically capable of doing so without leaving behind blood or clear tracks. The alternative possibility was even more unsettling. Someone else may have arrived at the scene. If another person had come upon the crash, they could have opened the door and removed Leah, either to help her or for darker reasons. The remote location made it possible for a passerby to act without witnesses, yet no confirmed reports of other vehicles or people in the area were ever recorded. The open door became the central mystery of the case. It symbolized the thin line between accident and crime, between survival and disappearance. From that moment forward, investigators could no longer treat this situation as a simple crash. The evidence suggested something more complex had occurred, something that could not be explained by impact alone. Had Leah survived the crash, she may have wandered into the forest, injured and disoriented, eventually succumbing to the harsh wilderness. That would explain why no body was found. Yet a darker possibility also emerged. Someone might have seen the accident and taken advantage of her vulnerable state, removing her before help arrived. Both scenarios were terrifying, and neither offered clear answers. The accident that should have provided clear answers only deepened the mystery. Instead of closing Leah's story, it marked the beginning of an unsolved case that would haunt investigators for decades. The road meant to guide her toward a fresh start led instead into silence. Somewhere among Washington's towering trees and hidden valleys, Leah Roberts vanished, leaving behind nothing but uncertainty and endless speculation. When authorities first arrived at the crash site, their initial conclusion followed a familiar pattern often seen in wilderness accidents. Investigators believed Leah had likely died from the impact or from her injuries shortly afterward, and that her body had been carried away by wild animals. The dense forest, steep terrain, and natural predators made this theory seem reasonable at first glance. In many remote cases, remains are scattered or difficult to recover. However, as search efforts continued, this explanation began to fall apart. Teams spent days combing through the ravine and surrounding woods, carefully examining the ground, fallen branches, and thick undergrowth. They expected to find blood, torn clothing, or bone fragments, yet nothing appeared. There were no biological traces that typically follow a fatal crash. The complete absence of physical evidence raised doubts about the animal predation theory. Experienced rescuers noted how unusual the scene felt. Even when wildlife is involved, some trace almost always who remains behind. In Leah's case, the forest seemed untouched, as though no injured person had ever passed through it. The crash had left chaos in metal and debris, but the surrounding environment remained strangely clean. This contradiction quietly suggested that the standard explanation might not apply. As the investigation unfolded, the media quickly seized on the mystery. Headlines began referring to Leah as the girl who vanished after the crash, a phrase that captured the eerie nature of the case. News outlets replayed images of the wrecked car hidden in the ravine, emphasizing the lack of answers. Public fascination grew, and with it came endless speculation. Some believed Leah had intentionally driven off the road, overwhelmed by grief and emotional pain. The idea of suicide spread rapidly through online forums and talk shows. Others rejected that explanation, pointing to the absence of a body and the personal belongings left behind. Another group suspected abduction, imagining a stranger seizing an opportunity in the isolated forest. There were also those who believed Leah had staged her disappearance. They focused on her letters, her emotional struggles, and her unknown destination. To them, The crash seemed like a perfect cover for starting a new life elsewhere. Each theory gained supporters, and soon the case became less about evidence and more about personal interpretation. This flood of speculation placed enormous pressure on investigators and Leah's family. Every rumor brought renewed attention, but also new confusion. The truth seemed to drift further away with each passing week, buried beneath layers of assumption and public imagination. As police continued questioning people in the area, a few witnesses came forward with vague accounts. Some claimed they had seen a person near the crash site around the time of the accident. Others reported noticing a vehicle stopped along the highway briefly. These statements hinted at the possibility that someone else had been present, yet none of the descriptions were consistent. Times varied, appearances differed, and no one could provide a clear or reliable identification. Without solid confirmation, these witness reports remained weak and unreliable. They were enough to suggest something unusual may have occurred, but not enough to build a concrete lead. Despite the growing theories, law enforcement found themselves with no specific suspects. There was no known enemy, no suspicious acquaintance, and no evidence pointing to criminal involvement. Everyone in Leah's life appeared cooperative and equally confused by her disappearance. The absence of a clear suspect made the investigation painfully slow and frustrating. Without solid evidence, detectives were forced to chase theories instead of facts. Every possibility seemed reasonable, yet none could be confirmed. The case drifted in circles, offering more questions than progress. One of the most unsettling developments came when search teams brought in trained tracking dogs to examine the crash site. These dogs were highly skilled at detecting human scent, even days after an incident. They could usually determine whether someone had exited a vehicle, walked through dense brush, or been moved by another person. Investigators hoped that dogs would finally provide direction, but the results were deeply unsettling. The dogs detected no scent trail anywhere around the wrecked vehicle. There was no sign that Leah had stepped out, walked through the brush, or moved into the forest. In cases like this, even faint traces are usually found. Yet here, nothing appeared. It was as if Leah's presence simply stopped inside the car, disappearing without any physical explanation. The results shocked both investigators and the search teams. In almost every situation where a person survives a crash or moves away from the scene, trained dogs are able to follow at least a partial trail. Even faint scents usually provide some direction. The complete absence of Leah's scent suggested something highly unusual. It implied that she may never have exited the vehicle on her own, or that the area had been disturbed in a way that removed all trace of her presence. This discovery shifted the investigation into a far more troubling direction. If Leah had not walked away, then someone else may have taken her from the scene. Another possibility was that the crash site had been altered, intentionally or unintentionally, erasing critical evidence. Either explanation moved the case away from a simple accident and toward a situation involving human involvement or manipulation. The crash was no longer viewed as an isolated tragedy in the wilderness. It became the center of a disappearance that defied normal logic. The forest's silence now carried a heavier weight, not just the absence of sound, but the absence of truth. With no body, no scent, no suspect, and no clear leads, Leah Roberts' Cliff slowly slipped into the painful category of cold cases, even as the mystery continued to deepen. As investigators struggled to make sense of the physical evidence, attention slowly turned toward Leah's emotional world. Behind her quiet personality and gentle presence existed a history shaped by sudden loss. The death of her parents in a plane crash had left a wound that never fully healed. Those close to Leah described how the tragedy changed her, creating a deep sadness that followed her, even during moments of joy. Leah often spoke about feeling disconnected from the life around her, despite being surrounded by people who cared for her. She confessed that she did not feel like she truly belonged anywhere. This sense of emotional isolation is common among individuals who experience major trauma at a young age. Losing both parents so suddenly can disrupt one's identity and create a lasting feeling of being unanchored in the world. Friends recalled that Leah sometimes described herself as floating through life rather than living it. She attended classes, maintained relationships, and followed routines, but emotionally she seemed distant. The future felt uncertain to her, not in a hopeful way, but in a confusing and heavy one. These feelings quietly influenced many of her decisions, even when she did not express them directly. Over time, Leah began talking more frequently about leaving. The idea of starting over became a recurring theme in conversations. She imagined moving somewhere far away, where no one knew her past, and where memories would not constantly remind her of what she had lost. To her, distance represented freedom from grief. His thoughts were not expressed with panic or desperation. Instead, they sounded calm, almost peaceful. This made them easy for others to dismiss as harmless dreaming, yet when viewed in hindsight, they reflected a deeper emotional struggle, one rooted in the desire to escape pain rather than simply seek adventure. One of the most unusual aspects of Leah's behavior was how quietly she prepared for her departure. She did not announce her plans or ask for advice. She simply left. There were no confirmed travel itineraries, no detailed explanations, and no expectations of when she might return. This secrecy suggested that the journey held personal meaning she did not feel ready to share. The letters Leah wrote before leaving added another layer of mystery. While loving and grateful, they carried a tone that felt heavier than a typical travel note. She thanked her adoptive family for their care and support, and expressed deep appreciation for everything they had done for her. Some later described the letters as sounding like farewells rather than updates. From a psychological perspective, such letters often appear when individuals are preparing for a major emotional break. They can represent closure, whether for a long journey, a new life, or something more final. In Leah's case, the intention behind them remained unclear, but the emotional weight was undeniable. Experts who reviewed the case later suggested Leah may have been experiencing a form of depression connected to unresolved grief. Depression does not always appear as sadness or withdrawal. Sometimes it presents as a strong desire for change, escape, or reinvention. The mind searches for relief from emotional pain by imagining a life completely separate from the source of trauma. At the same time, Leah continued expressing love and gratitude toward her family and friends. This duality created a complex psychological picture. She was not rejecting the people in her life. Instead, she seemed to be struggling with the emotional environment created by her past. This internal conflict is common among trauma survivors. They may care deeply for others while still feeling trapped by painful memories. The desire to escape does not mean a desire to abandon loved ones, but rather a desire to escape suffering. Then came a discovery that shifted the entire emotional narrative of the case. Investigators learned that Leah had withdrawn a significant amount of cash before leaving North Carolina. This was not a small amount meant for gas or food. It was a large enough sum to suggest planning, possibly enough to support herself for some time without relying on credit cards or traceable transactions. This single fact fueled the theory of voluntary disappearance. People began asking whether Leah had intentionally prepared to live under the radar. Cliff would allow her to travel without leaving financial footprints. Combined with her unknown destination and emotional state, it painted a picture of someone planning a fresh start. However, this twist also raised new questions. If Leah intended to disappear, why leave personal belongings in the car? Why risk a dangerous crash rather than simply drive away? Why create a scene that looked like a tragic accident? Some suggested the crash itself may not have been planned at all. Perhaps Leah lost control of the vehicle while driving, and the accident disrupted whatever plan she had. Others believed the crash could have been staged to mislead authorities and loved ones into believing she was dead. Psychologically, staging one's disappearance is rare, but not unheard of, especially among individuals seeking escape from emotional pain or identity struggles. However, such plans often leave behind mistakes or traces. In Leah's case, there was nothing, no confirmed sightings, no financial activity, no evidence of a new life. The cash withdrawal made voluntary disappearance possible, but it did not make it certain. Instead, it deepened the mystery. Leah's emotional struggles, her desire for escape, and her quiet preparations suggested she may have been planning a new beginning. Yet the violent crash and complete absence of evidence pointed toward something far less controlled. The truth seemed trapped somewhere, between intention and tragedy, between a young woman searching for peace and a situation that spiraled beyond anyone's control. And with every new detail uncovered, the line between accident and disappearance grew thinner. As years passed, without concrete answers, investigators and the public began forming different theories to explain what truly happened to Leah Roberts. Each theory attempts to connect the emotional clues, physical evidence, and strange circumstances surrounding the crash, yet none fully explains every detail. Instead, they create a complex puzzle where every possibility carries both logic and uncertainty. Theory: a personal motive from someone. Cliff's one theory suggests that someone close to Leah may have played a role in her disappearance. This person could have known about her emotional struggles and her desire to leave everything behind. Tensions following the death of her parents may have strained certain relationships, creating hidden resentment or conflict beneath the surface. Some speculate that jealousy, emotional dependency, or long-held secrets could have escalated into confrontation. If Leah trusted this person, she may have willingly met them during a journey, unaware of potential danger. Emotional crimes often occur between people who share deep, personal connections. The strength of this theory lies in psychological access. Those closest to Leah understood her vulnerability, her pain, and her dreams of escape. They would know how to manipulate her emotions or approach her without raising suspicion. Many crimes throughout history involve individuals within the victim's inner circle. However, the major weakness is the lack of direct evidence. No suspicious communications were confirmed, no threats were reported, and no individual showed clear motives strong enough to lead to violence or disappearance, without physical proof or reliable witnesses. This theory remains largely speculative. Theory B: accident. Turned into a cover-up. Another possibility is that Leah's crash was not the end of the story but the beginning of a cover-up. According to this theory, someone may have accidentally caused the crash or arrived shortly after it happened, panicked by the situation. They could have moved Leah from the scene. If Leah survived the initial impact but was injured, someone may have attempted to help or silence her to avoid responsibility. In darker interpretations, the person could have hidden her body to escape legal consequences. Supporters of this theory point to the unusual detail of the car door being open. This could suggest someone entered or exited the vehicle after the crash. The absence of Leah's body also fuels suspicion that she was removed rather than lost to the environment. Yet there are major problems with this idea. Investigators found no evidence of another vehicle involved in the accident. There were no tire marks, debris, or signs of collision. Additionally, moving an injured person out of a deep ravine without leaving traces would be extremely difficult. Without physical evidence, the cover-up scenario remains possible but unsupported. Theory C: stranger. Abduction. Some believe Leah may have encountered a stranger after the crash. The remote forest area could have attracted opportunistic criminals, hunters, or travelers passing through. If someone found Leah injured and vulnerable, they may have taken advantage of the situation. This theory fits with the isolated nature of the location. The dense woods and lack of traffic would allow a crime to occur without witnesses. An injured person would be unable to resist, making abduction easier. Criminal profiling shows that predators often seek out vulnerable individuals in secluded environments. A crash scene could present the perfect opportunity for someone with harmful intentions. However, the weakness of this theory lies in the lack of confirmed sightings. No reliable witness ever reported seeing a stranger with Leah. There were no screams, no emergency calls, and no physical evidence suggesting a struggle. While possible, the theory depends heavily on coincidence that a criminal just happened to be nearby at the exact moment of the crash. Theory D: voluntary disappearance. Perhaps the most discussed theory is that Leah intentionally disappeared to start a new life. Her emotional pain, letters of farewell, unknown destination, and cash withdrawal all support this possibility. She may have seen the journey as a chance to escape grief and rebuild her identity. Psychologically, individuals experiencing trauma sometimes seek complete reinvention rather than gradual healing. Cutting ties, changing location, and living quietly can feel like the only way to move forward. Their crash could have been accidental, after which Leah chose not to return. Or, in a more extreme version, it could have been staged to make authorities believe she was dead, allowing her to vanish without pursuit. The strength of this theory lies in its consistency with her mindset. Leah often talked about leaving, starting fresh, and escaping pain. The money suggests preparation rather than panic. But its biggest weakness is time. Over 20 years have passed with no trace of Leah, no confirmed identification, no financial records, no contact with anyone from her past. Voluntary disappearances usually leave some footprint eventually. especially over such a long period. The complete silence surrounding the case makes every theory difficult to fully accept. Each explanation seems to answer certain details, while leaving others unresolved. The personal motive theory focuses on emotional connections, but offers no direct proof. The cover-up theory explains the open car door yet fails to account for the lack of collision evidence. Strange abduction fits the isolated setting, but depends heavily on chance. Voluntary disappearance aligns with Leah's mindset, but struggles with the absence of any trace afterward. It is possible that the truth lies somewhere between these theories. Leah may have planned to leave, but encountered danger along the way. The crash could have been accidental, followed by unexpected human involvement. Emotional vulnerability may have placed her in harm's path. No single explanation answers every question, which is what makes this case so haunting. After more than 20 years, the mystery remains open, and the truth may be far simpler or far darker than anyone imagines. When people experience overwhelming loss, the human mind often searches for radical solutions. Grief does not always express itself through tears or visible despair. Sometimes it manifests as a deep desire to erase the past completely. Describe this as an escape response, where the individual believes that leaving everything behind is the only way to survive emotionally. For someone like Leah, who lost both parents suddenly, the emotional shock would have reshaped her entire identity. Her home no longer represented safety. Her relationships were tied to memories of loss. Every familiar place became a reminder of what was gone. In such cases, disappearance can feel less like running away and more like starting over. Trauma survivors sometimes fantasize about becoming someone new, a new name, a new city, a new life untouched by pain. This is not unusual in people experiencing unresolved grief. The mind seeks control after chaos. Leaving everything behind can feel like reclaiming power over a life that suddenly felt shattered. A sudden event, like a car crash, can become a psychological turning point. For someone already considering escape, it may appear as the perfect opportunity. The accident creates confusion, delays investigation, and offers a moment where a person can vanish without explanation. From a psychological standpoint, it can feel like fate opening a door. However, trauma also makes people vulnerable. Disorientation, injury, and shock impair judgment. A person in this state can easily become a target for manipulation or harm. What looks like a chance to disappear could instead become a moment where someone else takes control of the situation. This is where psychology introduces uncertainty. Was Leah acting with intention, or was she in a fragile state that placed her in danger? Both scenarios fit what is known about trauma behavior. Loss can drive independence, but it can also increase risk. Looking beyond psychology, philosophical and religious perspectives offer deeper insight into why humans sometimes seek disappearance after suffering. In Buddhist thought, suffering is seen as a fundamental part of existence. Pain creates attachment, and attachment creates desire for escape. When suffering becomes overwhelming, the mind longs for liberation. Not always through death, but through release from identity, memory, and emotional burden. From this lens, Leah's journey could represent an unconscious search for freedom from pain. Not destruction, but transformation. Leaving everything behind becomes a symbolic rebirth, a way to step outside suffering. Western existential philosophy views human life as a struggle for meaning in an often empty and chaotic world. After great loss, individuals may feel that life no longer makes sense. Some seek freedom through radical choices, believing that abandoning their old life is the only way to reclaim purpose. Existential thinkers suggest that when people confront emotional emptiness, they may choose disappearance as a form of control. If the world feels meaningless, creating a new identity can feel like creating meaning itself. Eastern philosophies often speak of karma and destiny. Major life events are seen as part of a larger path shaped by past actions and spiritual lessons. In this view, Leah's tragedy and disappearance may not be random, but part of a greater cycle of suffering and growth. From this perspective, the crash could symbolize a turning point where fate intervenes, whether leading to survival or tragedy. It marks a moment of irreversible change. In Christian theology, suffering is frequently interpreted as a test of faith or a path toward redemption. Loss can push individuals either closer to hope or deeper into despair. Some may seek spiritual renewal, while others feel abandoned and broken. If Leah held spiritual beliefs, Her journey could have been an attempt to find healing, forgiveness, or peace beyond the life she knew. Together, these perspectives highlight one truth. Across cultures and belief systems, humans often respond to deep pain by seeking transformation, escape, or meaning beyond their current reality. Turning back to the investigation itself, many experts believe the case may still hold untapped potential. Investigations in 2000 were limited by technology. DNA testing was less advanced. Cell phone tracking was minimal. Surveillance cameras were rare in rural areas. Much of the evidence relied on physical searches and witness statements. Some witnesses reported seeing individuals near the crash site, but these accounts were never fully developed. Memory fades, but re-interviewing witnesses with modern investigative techniques could reveal new insights. Advances in forensic science may also allow re-examination of the vehicle, soil samples, and surrounding area. Even tiny biological traces, overlooked at the time, could now provide answers. Cold cases across the country have been solved decades later using new technology and fresh eyes. Leah's case may still hold evidence waiting to be discovered. Yet even with modern tools, psychology reminds us that some mysteries remain unsolved not because of lack of effort, but because human behavior is unpredictable, which leads to the final question that continues to haunt this case. Did Leah choose to disappear, driven by grief and a deep desire for a fresh start? Or did someone take advantage of her most vulnerable moment and remove her from the scene? Was the crash an unexpected doorway to freedom, or the point where tragedy grew even darker? The silence left behind offers no clear answers, only endless possibilities. Within that silence, the human mind keeps searching for meaning, patterns, and closure. Perhaps the truth exists somewhere between intention and accident, between escape and harm, until new evidence surfaces. Leah Roberts remains suspended between life and disappearance. Her story stands as a powerful reminder of how trauma can redirect a human path forever, and how the most haunting mysteries are often defined, not by what is seen, but by what is missing. Leah Roberts left behind nothing but twisted metal, scattered belongings, and a silence that has lasted more than 2 decades. No body was ever found. No final answers were ever confirmed. What remains is the image of a young woman standing at the crossroads of grief, freedom, and an uncertain fate. The crash could have been a tragic accident that ended her life in the wilderness. It could have been the beginning of a carefully planned escape, or it could have hidden a crime carried out in the quiet of the forest. Sometimes, the most haunting mysteries are not filled with violence or noise, but with absence, with empty spaces where truth should be. If you have your own theory about what happened to Leah, share it in the comments. Don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe for more true crime stories. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Minds.